what he has seen with his own eyes 2 miles down under ice are hieroglyphs that archaeologists that he was in, that was the mission.
I knew things that I felt needed to be put out in the mainstream.
Modern whistleblowers still argue that there is more about Antarctica that is being covered up than we think.
Antarctica, the most isolated continent on Earth, a frozen wilderness buried beneath miles of ice, hiding secrets that humanity may never have been meant to discover. But in 1998, a retired Navy flight engineer in his 70s picked up the phone, called an investigative journalist he had never met, and said he was ready to talk about what he saw buried in the Antarctic ice in 1982. He had kept the secret for almost 20 years. He had signed the papers. He had followed every order. But he was dying now, and he could not take it with him. The journalist who answered that call was Linda Moulton Howe. She pressed record, and what he told her over the next several hours would launch a 25-year investigation that multiple governments have been trying to shut down ever since. The Man on the Ridge. The year was 1982. A Navy flight engineer whose name Linda has protected to this day was on a routine supply run from McMurdo Station to a remote research camp deep in the Antarctic interior. Somewhere over the ice sheet, an equipment malfunction forced the crew to set down early on an exposed ridge, wind hammering the fuselage, temperatures so low that exposed skin burns in seconds, the kind of place where you fix what's broken and you leave. But while the crew worked on repairs, the flight engineer looked out across the ridge and he stopped. Something was wrong with the landscape. On a distant rise, shapes broke the horizon that did not belong. Geometric, symmetrical, too regular, too angular, too precise to be ice formations. He moved closer, close enough to see what looked like the top of a massive structure, partially exposed where wind and time had stripped the ice away. It was angular, it was solid, and it was made of something that was clearly not natural. Before he could reach it, the radio crackled. Orders: return to McMurdo immediately, no explanation, no discussion. When they landed, intelligence officers were waiting. The crew was separated, debriefed individually, and told their flight logs were now classified. They signed additional non-disclosure agreements, and they were given one instruction. This never happened. Now, here's what you need to understand about Linda Moulton Howe. She is not a conspiracy theorist with a YouTube channel. She is an Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist who has spent over 4 decades interviewing military personnel, scientists, and government officials. She built her career on documented evidence, verified credentials, and sources who could be corroborated. When the flight engineer contacted her in 1998, retired, in his 70s, and knowing his time was running out, she didn't rush to publish. She interviewed him for hours. She verified his service record. She confirmed his credentials. His account included specific coordinates, exact dates, and the names of other crew members on that flight. Everything checked out. But Linda knew one witness wasn't enough, so she filed his testimony away. She told no one, and she waited. She had no idea what was about to start. If this is already making the hair on the back of your neck stand up, hit subscribe, because what comes next makes this look like a warm-up. The pattern. Over the next 20 years, they came to her one by one. Military personnel, scientists, contractors, people who had no connection to each other, who had never met, who had been stationed at different bases in different decades, all telling Linda pieces of the same impossible story. A geophysicist who had run ice-penetrating radar surveys sat across from Linda with his jaw tight and his voice barely above a whisper. He had found cavities beneath the ice, not small pockets, massive voids, geometrically regular, far too deep and too structured to be natural caves. When he flagged the data, his supervisor's face went white. The readings were classified within hours. His entire team was reassigned. He never saw that data again. A Navy CB construction battalion member described being deployed to a classified excavation site miles away from any official research station. No scientific briefing, no ice core mission, just drilling straight down. And at the bottom of the shaft, he saw something that instantly made his stomach sink. Metallic structures, walls that looked engineered, surfaces too smooth, too intentional, too flawless to be natural. He looked at them and thought, someone built this. A scientist from Argentina's Esperanza base told Linda that research teams occasionally recovered artifacts from ice cores dated to more than 12,000 years old. Every time, every single time, military personnel arrived, seized the samples, and made them vanish. No records, no reports, no published papers. Gone. A pilot who flew missions across the continent described a no-fly zone that appeared on none of the public maps. An entire restricted area where civilian flights were prohibited and military flights needed clearance levels almost no one possessed. When he asked a superior what was down there, the response was brief. Sensitive research. Stop asking. None of these people knew one another. None of them had seen Linda's other interviews. But every testimony pointed toward the same conclusion. Something ancient and carefully built was buried beneath the Antarctic ice, and multiple governments knew about it. Linda sat with all of these accounts spread across her desk and felt the weight of what she was holding. This was not just one story. This was a pattern she could no longer ignore and could not yet prove. But then someone reached out to her who changed everything. The testimony that changed everything. It was 2016. Linda received a message from someone she would later describe as the most trustworthy source she had ever interviewed in her entire career. A retired NORAD officer, classified clearance, part of an Antarctic operation in the early 2000s that appears in no public record. His identity is the one Linda has protected more carefully than any other. When he started speaking, Linda fell silent because what he described did not simply add to the previous testimonies. It connected them. Every separate account, every fragment, every unexplained detail from 20 years of interviews suddenly snapped into place, like pieces of a machine fitting together. According to his account, based on what he was briefed on and what he personally witnessed, beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, at a depth of approximately 2 miles, there are multiple structures of artificial origin. Not geological anomalies, not ice formations, not anything that belongs in any geology textbook. Structures created by someone, designed with purpose and precision. And they are old, far older than the ice that buried them. They existed before the last ice age, meaning they were constructed when Antarctica was a green, temperate continent with rivers and forests more than 12,000 years ago. Let that sink in for a moment. More than 12,000 years. That is thousands of years before Sumer. Thousands of years before the first Egyptian dynasty. Before every civilization we have ever considered ancient. He told Linda these structures were first discovered in the 1940s during Operation High Jump, the massive 1946 to 1947 Antarctic expedition led by Admiral Richard Byrd. Officially, the mission focused on establishing research bases and preparing personnel for polar conditions. The classified reality, according to this source, was something entirely different. Seismic surveys had detected anomalies deep beneath the ice that no one could explain and no one was allowed to discuss. And here's the part that should make you pause. Since then, for more than 7 decades, The United States, Russia, and more recently, China have been conducting covert recovery operations across Antarctica. Not research, recovery, archaeological excavation, and technological retrieval carried out completely separate from the public science programs operating under the Antarctic Treaty. The structures, he told Linda, are not small. They are not a single outpost. What has been uncovered appears to be a vast urban complex, buildings, infrastructure, and technology pointing to a civilization so advanced it challenges everything we believe about human history. Some sections can be reached through natural ice caves, where shifting glaciers have opened hidden passages. Others are accessed through drilling operations disguised as routine scientific research. And the technology being recovered from these structures, pay close attention to this, some of it still functions. Not all of it is understood, but working devices have been recovered and are now being examined at classified facilities. Linda asked the question any journalist would ask. Prove it. The officer gave her coordinates. He shared internal documents, heavily redacted but showing classified project designations at the exact locations he described. And he gave her names, other personnel involved in these operations, people she could locate, people she could contact. But the thing Linda could not stop thinking about was the silence on the other end of her own phone. 20 years of scattered testimonies had suddenly become one story, and that story was bigger than anything she had ever investigated. What she didn't realize yet was that the most unsettling testimony was still ahead. What they found inside. A military contractor who worked on a classified drilling operation in 2003 agreed to speak with Linda, but only because he was dying. Cancer. Terminal. And he could not carry what he had witnessed to the grave. He described being lowered into an ice shaft that had been drilled to reach what his briefing called a geological anomaly. The descent was slow. The platform groaned beneath his weight as it moved deeper into the shaft, foot by foot. The daylight above shrank into a bright circle and then disappeared completely. The walls were ice, white, streaked with blue, completely featureless. The cold was overwhelming. The only sounds were the steady hum of the winch and his own breathing echoing through the shaft. Then, more than a mile down, everything changed. The ice stopped. Not gradually, it simply ended. The walls gave way to something smooth, almost metallic, a surface with a faint shine that reflected his headlamp, a surface that had no reason to exist a mile beneath an Antarctic ice sheet. The temperature felt different. The echoes changed. Even the air seemed different, like walking from one room into another. He stepped off the platform into a chamber that was clearly, unmistakably not natural. The space stretched out around him. It was enormous. There were markings on the walls, symbols, geometric designs, unlike any writing system anyone on his team had ever encountered. The team stood frozen in silence, their flashlights slicing through a darkness that had remained untouched for thousands of years. And then he saw it, built into the far wall, a doorway, not a crack, not an opening, a constructed entrance, framed with purpose, leading somewhere even deeper. His hands were trembling. He could feel his heartbeat pounding in his throat. The team was not authorized to go any farther. That required a clearance level none of them possessed. But he watched as scientists and military personnel wearing specialized equipment prepared to enter. They moved with the calm confidence of people who had done this many times before. He was sent back to the surface. He received a substantial bonus. He signed a non-disclosure agreement that threatened criminal prosecution. And he carried what he had seen in silence for years until the cancer diagnosis made keeping the secret feel pointless. He told Linda, "People deserve to know we found something down there. something that changes everything we believe we know about history. Now, listen to what else Linda's investigation uncovered, because the testimonies didn't stop. They only intensified. A satellite imagery analyst told her he had watched certain Antarctic coordinates get digitally removed from public data. Not just lowered in resolution, but deliberately hidden, blurred, erased. He had seen the original images before processing. Straight-edged shapes, formations that looked engineered. He sat at his desk staring at structures that should not have existed. And when he brought it up with supervisors, he was told those areas were protected under special access protocols, not his concern. A materials scientist who briefly examined samples from Antarctic recovery operations described alloys unlike anything in any known database, corrosion resistance beyond anything recorded, strength-to-weight ratios that should not have been possible, manufacturing signatures that modern technology still cannot reproduce. A logistics coordinator for the NSF Antarctic program discovered equipment manifests that matched no known research mission. Industrial excavation machinery, sealed transport containers guarded by armed military escorts, shipments routed through Department of Defense channels completely outside scientific oversight. Every new witness revealed something even more unsettling than the last. Symbols carved into walls that no linguist on any team could decipher. Electronic equipment that malfunctioned near certain excavation sites. Instruments spinning wildly. Readings surging because of electromagnetic interference with no identifiable source. And then came the claim that sent shockwaves through Linda's entire network. Multiple sources independently confirmed that recovered artifacts had been transported to classified U.S. facilities for reverse engineering. Not study, reverse engineering. The picture was no longer incomplete. It was enormous, and it was demanding to be told. But telling it meant risking everything Linda had spent more than 40 years building. The silence. By 2020, Linda had gathered more than 15 credible testimonies, verified coordinates, confirmed names and affiliations, a body of evidence that, taken together, pointed toward one of the most significant secrets in modern history. And then her sources started dying, one after another. The people who had trusted her with the most dangerous secrets of their lives were running out of time. The Navy flight engineer, the man on the ridge, the one who started all of this with a phone call in 1998, passed away in 2019. Linda received the news and sat with it in silence. Then the NORAD officer, her most important source, the man whose single testimony had connected 2 decades of scattered accounts into one astonishing picture. He died in 2022. Others were rapidly fading, hospital beds, hospice care, memories slowly slipping away. And Linda, now in her 80s, realized something with painful clarity. She was becoming the last person alive who held all of these testimonies together, the final link connecting the witnesses to the world. That realization changed her. It didn't just push her forward, it frightened her. Because if she waited any longer, 25 years of investigation, the life's work of a dozen dying men who had chosen truth over silence would disappear. Gone, as though none of it had ever happened. She said in a 2023 interview, "I realized that if I didn't tell this story completely, with all the details and all the sources I could responsibly identify, then it would die. These men trusted me. I have a responsibility to make sure their testimonies live on." In late 2023, she began putting together what she calls the Comprehensive Antarctic Report. Every testimony, every coordinate, every operation name, every piece of evidence collected across 25 years of investigation. And in early 2024, she released portions through earthfiles.com. She published specific coordinates where witnesses reported exposed structures or underground entry points. She shared declassified Operation High Jump documents with redacted sections suggesting objectives far beyond research stations. She presented anonymized testimony transcripts with enough credential details to establish credibility. She compiled satellite imagery showing deliberate data obscuration over the exact areas her sources had identified. And she issued a direct challenge. Other nations have satellites. Independent researchers have ice-penetrating radar. Scientists work on that continent every single day. If these testimonies are true, the evidence is there. She told the world exactly where to look. Now, here's the part that keeps me awake at night. The response from every government involved was exactly the same. Complete, absolute silence. No denials, no corrections, no lawsuits, no charges, no official statements of any kind. Nothing. Just silence so complete it felt intentional, because it was. Think about that. An Emmy Award-winning journalist publicly accuses multiple world governments of carrying out a 70-year cover-up involving ancient structures and recovered technology beneath the Antarctic ice. And not a single government says a word. Not one denial. Not one press release called it fiction. Linda says that silence is the strongest confirmation she could have received. If she were making it all up, discrediting her would be easy. One official statement could end it. But responding to her investigation forces a choice no government wants to make. Either confirm what she's revealing or explain why dozens of credible military and scientific personnel are all independently telling the same story. So they remain silent, and that silence only grows louder. Independent researchers began investigating. Amateur satellite analysts examined her coordinates and reported unusual anomalies. Scientists submitted requests for historical radar data from the locations she identified. Most of those requests were denied, classified as national security material for geological data from a continent supposedly devoted to peaceful scientific research. One former Antarctic station worker publicly came forward to support Linda's claims, stating what anyone who has spent extended time on that continent already knows. There are places you do not enter, questions you do not ask, and classified military operations that have nothing to do with science taking place alongside the research programs the public sees. The implications, if even part of this is true, are extraordinary. A civilization advanced enough to build cities existed more than 12,000 years ago. Thousands of years before Sumer, before Egypt, before every culture we consider ancient. Human progress is not the simple linear story we were taught. Knowledge was lost, and it may be quietly, secretly being recovered right now. Linda is currently producing a comprehensive documentary presenting every testimony in full. She has deposited copies of her complete investigation, including the names of sources who gave posthumous permission to be identified, with multiple institutions as insurance, ensuring the information survives no matter what happens to her. She put it simply, "I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm asking them to examine the testimonies. These are real people, real credentials, real experiences. And if even half of what they told me is accurate, we are living in a world very different from what we've been taught." Those witnesses are mostly gone now, but their testimonies remain documented. Their accounts have been preserved. And Linda Moulton Howe, at 81 years old, kept the promise she made to every one of them. She told the truth. But here's the question I can't stop thinking about, and I don't think you can either. If multiple governments have known about structures beneath Antarctica for more than 70 years, if they've been recovering technology from a civilization that existed before everything in our history books, if they've built an entire system of secrecy around it while telling us that continent is nothing more than ice and penguins, then what else are they hiding? And what happens when they can no longer hide it? If you've made it this far, you already know this channel doesn't turn away from the stories that matter. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs to see it.